Do you ever feel like your life is just a mess? And most of your time is spent trying to make it look like less of a mess, making it look clean from the outside so you feel free from judging eyes. We love to cover up our inadequacies so we feel better about who we are and what we have to provide. We scrub, we sweep, we lie, we run, we hide, we pretend. We're so good at pretending that everything's okay. But is that really how you feel as you start and end each day? Or is the chaos that surrounds you eating you alive? Do you ever wonder, is this it? And then we die? I know it may sound morbid, but it's okay to ask the question. It's okay to ask why. Why all the pain and sickness and anger and hatred and abuse and neglect and death? And why, in the midst of all this, do we fake smiles, hold back tears, and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps? We do all this because we've either forgotten or never been told that someone already cleaned up our mess. Someone already demolished pain and sickness and anger and hatred and abuse and neglect and death. Someone already nailed every past, present, and future sin to a cross and then soaked it in his blood. Someone chose to love us first, to release the holy flood of grace, of joy, of peace. His name is Jesus Christ, the only hope, the only remedy in the midst of all this debris, this carnage, this toxic insufficiency. And yes, we have a deep, deep need to humble ourselves and call on his name. And yes, we have to have faith that with this new life he's given us, we will never be the same. And then we need to stop. We need to stop trying to clean up our messes. We need to stop diminishing the unmatched power of the cross and allow Christ to be what we cannot: perfect, whole, complete, spotless. The best news there is, or ever has been, is that Jesus made a way not just into heaven, but to experience fullness here on earth. Do you know this? Have you felt God's peace surround you and give your soul rebirth? I pray you have, because there's nothing like it. But I also pray that it doesn't end there, because good news isn't news unless it's shared. If we just keep it to ourselves, it's really just a good secret. And Jesus didn't come to earth to live a sinless life, die an excruciating death in our place, and then rise from the grave after 3 days, crushing Satan under his feet and forever removing our guilt and shame so that we would keep it a secret. He longs for all people in all nations from all cultures to know him and be saved through his redemptive grace. And it may be easy to think that anyone, anywhere, could respond to this gift that God has shared. I mean, we live in a day and age when everything is online. Everyone is connected to everyone else at all times, and most people know way too much about other people's lives. But there are about 7.5 billion people living on Earth today, and 3 billion of them have never heard Jesus' name. And if everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, how then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. Those 3 billion people need those beautiful feet. They need to be filled with soul-soothing peace. They need saving grace and the life that it brings. They need to know their messes have already been cleaned. They need you to participate in God's great rescue story, his plan to reach all people for our good and his glory. So the question remains, what will you do? The unreached are waiting for someone like you.
Hi, I'm Luke Womack, founder of the Go Fund. You know, one of my favorite stories is of William Carey, a missionary to India in 1793. Before he left, he gathered a group of friends around and said to them, "I will go down if you will hold the rope." He knew that he could not do it alone. He needed help from his friends. And one of his friends who decided to help him was Andrew Fuller, a true rope holder. A rope holder is really someone who leverages their heart and their treasure to support a missionary going to the mission field. You know, in God's economy, there's not one group that's more important between the missionary and the rope holder. Both are critical to the mission. The question is, which end of the rope are you going to be on? I'd like to share a story with you about a present-day rope holder who's currently leveraging these resources and their hearts to extend missionaries to the nations.
My name is Amber, and I am a rope holder. I'm a recent graduate, and as I was in college, I started to hear more about God's heart for the nations in an organization called the Go Fund. I didn't understand that student debt was such an obstacle to get missionaries on the mission field. As I started to learn about the Go Fund, I was invited to an event just to help a friend out, but it ended up helping me in the long run. In a season where I was learning about God's heart for the nations and what He cared about, I wanted to care about what He cares about, and He cares about His name being praised among all people. And I didn't understand that there were so many people in our world without access to the gospel, without access of knowing who He was. I came to this event to help my friend, but it really ended up helping me and giving me a way to take part in God's heart for the nations. As I started to learn about what my God cared about, I wanted to take part in it. And one of the ways to do that was to give. But I'm a student on loans, and with a minimum paying job, I could only give maybe $10 a month. And I started to question, could God really use that? But yes, He can. My God is big enough to use my small sacrifice to make much of His name. And I started to question, what if I gave $10 a month and one of my friends did? We could get a group together to give a larger amount because God is worthy of that. Through being a rope holder and giving monthly, it was a really tangible way for me to practice giving. And I say practice for a reason, because giving doesn't always come naturally for me in the season of life, but it was a really sweet thing to realize that everything that I owned, my life and resources, are the Lord's. And so I can give that freely for Him because it's worth it. So I personally love coffee, and I realized that if I cut back on that just a little bit, I can give to places like the Go Fund and hold the rope for people who are actively bringing the gospel in areas of the world that don't have it. I can hold the rope for families like the Rimsteads, and I find deep joy in that, and it's absolutely worth it.
Hi, we're the Rimsteads. My name is David. This is my wife Emily, and currently we're serving in the field of Papua New Guinea, specifically among an unreached tribal group called Malayali. Falling in love with the scriptures, that took me on a road to wanting to become a pastor. So going off to a private Christian university and having that desire to get my theology degree so that one day I could be a pastor of a church in the state of California.
It was in high school that I went on my first short-term mission trip, and right after that I went on 4 more mission trips in the next few years. And the Lord really began growing a desire for the nations. And I remember just one day talking with Dave in the car. I was 19 years old, and we were driving in the car, and I told him, I said, David, I really feel like the Lord is calling me to be a missionary, but there is no way that I would ever be a missionary, because I said these 3 things. I said, 1, I am afraid of the dark. It is the truth. 2, I am afraid of all bugs and insects and dirt. I don't like it. And number 3 reason why I would never be a missionary is I would never leave my mom and dad. And so I was so serious and firm when I was telling him these 3 reasons why God could definitely never be calling me to be a missionary. And David kind of looked at me and laughed. And I was like, why are you laughing? I'm being serious. And he said, I have a feeling the Lord's going to continue calling you to be a missionary, because He wants to tell you it's not about you, but it's about Him.
I wanted to be a pastor. I was a campus minister, a man that began to really disciple me. His wife began to disciple Emily. And it was for the first time this guy was poking holes into this bubble that I had created, really just saying, David, is this really what God wants to do? And I remember him saying, you want to bring the gospel to California, you want to plant a church in California, but there are people groups that have never heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. They will never hear the gospel of Jesus Christ unless someone goes to them, learns their language, and for the very first time in their history, shares the gospel to them.
So once David and I were both on the same page, knowing that this is the way that we wanted to spend our lives, serving the Lord overseas, it now shifted to, okay, where are we gonna go? Where do we feel like the Lord is leading us? And so we kind of mapped out a few different places where we wanted to take vision trips to just see how we would fit in these different countries. And so we ended up taking a vision trip to Papua New Guinea. All the other places that we wanted to go to kind of fell through. And once we went to Papua New Guinea and we saw the task that remained, we got to see lists of tribes that had been asking for missionaries to come for years. We just couldn't validate in our minds leaving and not coming back. We saw the task that remained and we wanted to come back, and so that is what we set out to do.
Coming back to America, we were enthused, we were ready to go. We were just kind of asking the question of, okay, now how do we go? We knew we needed to go through an agency, but as we started researching agencies, we realized there was something with every agency when it came to student debt, and that was very discouraging to us. Each agency had a barrier or a cap of how much student debt a missionary could have, and we exceeded that cap, and that was absolutely heartbreaking. Now we're kind of asking the question, well, how are we going to go overseas when we have so much student debt?
But when it came to student debt, it wasn't just a hurdle, it was a huge mountain, and we definitely felt that looking in the face of our student debt and thinking, how are we going to be able to serve in Papua New Guinea with this?
And we remember sitting down at a table with Luke Womack and Brian Zuniga, and Luke saying, you guys, I have an idea. I have an idea, and it has everything to do with taking care of your student debt so you could go overseas. At that point, we thought, man, there may be hope in this. Because our biggest discouragement, I think, in all of it was, if we tried to take care of our student debt ourselves, we would be in America for another 20 plus years, meaning we more than likely would not end up overseas. And so finally, two people with an idea of a solution, taking care of our student debt so that we could go overseas immediately, we were stoked.
And we finished training, and we were set. Our tickets were bought, and I remember getting a call. We had all of our bags already packed. We were probably just weeks out from actually taking off to Papua New Guinea for our first 4-year term, and we get a call from Luke, and everything's official. The paperwork's gone through. They are now officially paying our student loans, and man, I remember just falling on the floor and crying and thanking the Lord. For so much time, we were thinking, how are we going to do this? How are we going to go? We know that our education was vital for us to be able to go overseas and do what we're about to do. And so that the Lord just took care of it. He took care of all of it. Man, that grew our faith. And we still look back to that moment now when we're overseas, when we're in the middle of the jungle, and life is hard. It is really hard. But we think back, the Lord, He obliterated that mountain, and He allowed us to be here, and He's so faithful, and He's going to be faithful to the end of this task. And we began looking for a tribe. One tribe that had been asking for about 7 years was the Malayali tribe, and that is where we have moved into and built our houses among and are currently living with the Malayali people. And so a couple days a week, my language helpers will come to my house and we'll go to their gardens, and they teach us language. We're helping them plant in the gardens, or we're helping them get firewood, or helping them with their babies. We're giving medicine, things that we can just, be loving on them, learning their language, building relationships. And so one of my main language helpers, her name is Kali, and they actually built their house right next to ours, directly, 6 feet away from our house, once they moved into the village. And She comes to my house regularly, and we'll start walking to her garden. And this is the middle of the jungle, and so it is very tricky to walk in. And as well as learning language and culture, we're learning just how to live in the middle of the jungle in this completely different element. And so when part of walking through their gardens is they just chop down these huge trees and they fall over, and then they walk across them all through their garden. And so for them, it's really easy. Kali just glides across these logs like it's no big deal. But for me, I do the humble thing and I scoot across on my bum because I'm just not capable of walking across it. And so Callie, noticing my inability to walk across a tree bridge very early on. Death trap. We say they're death traps only because if you fall, you're going to be impaled by all these other little branches below. No big deal. But she noticed very quickly that I was scared to walk across these trees. And so she would come and she would grab my hand and she would hold my hand as we walked across the tree bridge. And, you know, we were doing this for months, which turned into years. And I remember one day her holding my hand, coming and grabbing my hand and holding it and walking across the tree bridge. And I got really emotional, and we got to the other side of the bridge, and she said, "Emily, like, you look like you're crying. What's wrong? Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I'm okay, Callie. Right now, you hold my hand every single day to teach me your language and to teach me your culture. But there's gonna come a day where it's gonna change, and I'm gonna hold your hand and I'm gonna teach you God's talk. And I can't wait for that day to come." And right now we're in this waiting period because we don't know their language and culture good enough to explain the gospel yet. And so we're anxious for that day, and it's coming and it's getting sooner. And we are excited for that.
But I think the reality is that because of your partnership, because of you guys holding the rope, keeping us there, we are so close to being fluent in the Malayali language, so close for them to be able to finally read and write in their language, so close for them to be able to see the scriptures for themselves. And we are almost there for the day that they hear the gospel of Jesus Christ for the very first time. And that is going to be an amazing day. Not because of Emily and David, not because of our coworkers, but because of all of us, rope holders, people praying, financially supporting, because all of us are working for this endeavor to see the Malayali people hear the gospel for the very first time.
You know, the concept of the rope holder really was the inspiration for us to start the Go Fund. I take it back to childhood. As far back as I can remember, my dad will come into the room and share a Bible story with me before bed. And I thought this was normal, that every kid had the same experience. Unfortunately, it wouldn't really be until college when I learned that that wasn't the case. I met someone who walked me through scripture and explained to me that the Bible really is just the story of God's glory, and He demands to be worshiped among all peoples. The problem is that there are still some people who have no access to scripture, and unlike me as a child, they have no idea who Jesus is because their father doesn't have a Bible in their language. And that was crushing for me. And I believed it, but I wanted to see it for myself. And so one summer in college, I went to India and I spent 2 months there. Honestly, probably the worst summer of my life. It was incredibly painful, especially because I remember this one example where I went into a temple, a Hindu temple in downtown Delhi, and I actually saw a man who was bowing down to and worshiping what my dad taught me as a 4-year-old was an idol. And I knew he was worshiping a stone that could do nothing for him. And I was crushed. And it took me back to Old Testament stories that my dad had shared with me, and I realized this is still happening today. And it was really in that moment I decided, if I call myself a Christian, I must either go, send, or disobey. Those are the only 3 options. And as I tried to figure out how I might step into this, I started with sending. So I called about 100 of my college peers and just asked, number 1, have you ever considered a career in long-term missions to the unreached? And many of them said yes. The second question is, why are you not there now? And the answer was the same for every single person: student loan debt. And I knew I had to do something about it. Perhaps God had set me aside for such a time as this to step in and play one part in His great story so that the unreached might have access to the gospel. I had 3 objections right away. If I'm gonna help pay off student loan debt for missionaries who want to go to the field, why do we even need people with an education? Why not just send them right out of high school? I had to ask the question. And I found that the answer is really simple. 60% of unreached people live in countries that are closed to missionaries, but they are open to college-educated nurses, lawyers, teachers, engineers, business owners. And so for us just to say, let's send those without a college education, is really to neglect 60% of the unreached who live in countries closed to missionaries. Secondly, why not just send those with an education but without debt? Certainly some graduate without debt, which is true. 61% of college graduates walk the stage and turn the tassel with $32,000 of educational loan debt. If you're married, it's probably double. And so for us just to say, let's send those educated people without student loan debt, is to neglect the majority, 61% of our potential sending base, and that didn't work either. So we realized we need to send those who have graduated from college, and most of them are going to have student loan debt. And the third piece for us was to ask, well, why can't we just send them anyways? The problem was that mission agencies aren't going to send them. Most mission agencies will not send someone with $32,000 or $64,000 if they're married of student loan debt. Frankly, nor should they. We get emails almost every single week from missionaries currently on the field who have been there for 1 to 2 years, and they're writing to ask us to help them. Dear GoFund, we have student loan debt and it's crushing us. We were planning to be here for 30 years and we've been here for 18 months. Can you help us? We're going to have to come home now. We simply have to do better than that. And that's exactly why we started the GoFund. The GoFund is on a mission to accelerate Christian disciple making among the unreached by eliminating the barrier of educational debt for qualified missionaries. The GoFund is unique in that 100% of what we raise goes directly toward our missionaries. We've raised all of our other costs in other ways. I've heard it said before that the Christian church has all of the resources it needs to finish the Great Commission in the next 5 years. I want to ask you a question. Is this going to be the generation that finishes the Great Commission? I certainly want it to be, and we can play a small part by eliminating what we believe currently is the #1 barrier to seeing it finished, and that's educational loan debt. I've heard it said before that when it comes to world mission, every Christian must either go, send, or disobey. And the GoFund is giving you the opportunity to send as a rope holder. For as little as $10 a month, you can help send missionaries to the unreached by eliminating their student debt barrier. And if you choose to do this and become a rope holder, we're going to send you a rope holder keychain that helps remind you to pray for missionaries who are on the end of your rope. And also emails containing stories about how God is using your investment. Now, will you pull out your smartphone right now to learn about how you might join us in this movement? And remember that 100% of anything that you choose to give goes directly toward our missionary partners. Now, every aspiring missionary is not going to make it to the mission field. But with your help, we can change that reality for some, that they might actually make it to the field and take the gospel to those who have never heard it before. And so that you and I can play our role as senders to help finish the Great Commission. Please take a moment to consider how God is leading you today.